What's up, gamers? Dreamcastguy here, talking today about the spooky seasons, times where it's fun to enjoy games that go bump in the night. And as many of you know, I have pretty much 600 different PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 games, stuff that really ranges between frights, jump scares, and classical horror experiences. And today, I want to try and do something a bit different and dive deep to find games that I feel like truly are the best of the best. Things that aren't just going to terrify you, but hopefully are going to haunt your nightmares. So this Halloween, please sit down, enjoy as we talk about the top 10 best horror games for the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 5. Number 10. Days Gone. Perhaps the most difficult aspect of horror sometimes is just making you feel properly trapped, making it so that the monsters are daunting, but also just making it so you're a bit frightful to reload your gun or pick up that next bandage. But Days Gone, I've always been the most impressed about this game because it manages to scare you, but in an open world setting. In this game you have a motorcycle, you have a crafting system, you have an ability to make bombs and traps and stuff like that, but even with all the power and all the mobility, this game is such a freaky experience. Just dealing with hordes of sometimes literally hundreds of infected is quite a daunting sight. And really, this is one of those games that you can play for 60 or 70 hours. This is easily the longest game in this entire video, and it's one of those ones that really locks you into the universe and makes you afraid to even put that controller down. Number 9. Tormented Souls. There's a bit of a bad habit within the horror fandom to kind of look back very favorably only at the 90s and the early 2000s. Games like the first Resident Evils or classic Silent Hill. But as much as I feel like we probably reminisce a bit too much, it feels like this is part of what Tormented Souls itself is attempting to do. This game is very retro. This is actually a PlayStation 5 exclusive, at least as to the recording of this video, and it is a game that really manages to have crazy crisp visuals, incredibly gory monster design, and a lot of just really interesting puzzles to it. This feels almost like a fan version of Silent Hill mixed with some of the most messed up Outlast monsters, and I really enjoyed that. This is one of those games that I feel like I sat down, I beat in one 10-hour setting, and at the end I immediately wanted to start a fresh save file and go through the entire thing again just to unlock every single ending. Number 8. Dying Light. At this point, it seems as if a majority of gamers across the planet are a bit burned out on the idea of typical zombies, the rotting shamblers, the standard style of slow, very methodical zombies we saw back in movies in the 60s and 70s and stuff. But Dying Light, this is a game that managed to amass a very large fan base because it takes the classic zombie formula and then totally remixes it by adding in tons of parkour, so you're just able to scale straight up the sides of buildings or trying to escape a just gigantic horde of undead by leaping across the tops of cars and stuff. But it also adds in a very interesting melee system which allows you to kick, punch, or sometimes just bash the brains out of some very special infected. Dying Light is an incredibly fun game because it feels like it's that absolutely perfect mix of empowering and completely terrifying. I like doing side quests. I liked the RPG aspects of this, and more than anything, I like the fact that this game just feels so cheesy. Having this completely bonkers tale of people just past their limits is just so ridiculous that I'm kind of just glad that it exists. Number 7. Control. Alright, so let me just say that there's probably going to be at least a couple people offended that I'm putting Control in this video because technically it's not a full-blown horror experience. While it does have some creepy crawlies and some floating upside-down beasties here and there, this is more of a cerebral experience. This is by the developers that did Alan Wake, and the story, writing, and universe itself is definitely more about making you afraid of the idea of nightmares instead of just having things bust out of the darkness and say boo. boo, but this is actually why I respect Control so much. Having a chance to unlock these special abilities, because we do get a chance to have like telekinesis and throw items across the room, or use our own mental powers to create a shield and block incoming bullets. This is a game that gives you a ton of different tools for a very big toolkit and still manages to make you feel incredibly powerless when the bad guys show up. I love Control, and while it may not be a standard gigantic horror masterpiece, it's a game I definitely think deserves to be talked about, especially that PlayStation 5 edition they dropped. Number 6. World War Z. Easily one of the most legendary co-op games of all time has got to be the old school Left 4 Dead and Left 4 Dead 2 that came out back on the Xbox 360 and computers way back in the day. But a lot of people have kind of been craving something in that vein. The idea of having a couple friends with a couple shotguns dealing with a very big problem in their path. Well, World War Z, it really managed to capture that essence. In a lot of ways, this feels like the true version of Left 4 Dead 3, but with one gigantic extra twist to it. WWZ is chaotically gigantic. This has a system where it can actually run thousands of zombies on screen simultaneously. So there are these huge finales at the end of each of these chapters that have you trying to set up choke points and turrets and sometimes just flame throw down humongous groups of these guys. And what I like about this game is that it manages to make you feel very, very much screwed from start to finish. I beat this game, but honestly, it's one of those projects that the second I finished, I wanted to go onto the internet and start looking up different tutorials to how to be a better player, because I needed to know just every strategy to become the very best zombie slayer I utterly could be. Number 5. Outlast 2. Every game in this video is filled with some very great gunplay, times where you can pull out some special weapons to defend yourself, all except for this one. Outlast 2 is a completely combat-free game. There's no way to defend yourself. In fact, when the baddies start trying to hunt you down, the only thing you can do to stay safe is hide. This is basically a gigantic, extremely dark game of hide and seek. But here's what I love about that. Outlast 2 constantly plays with your perceptions. You're essentially trapped way up in the mountains after this helicopter crash, and you have to try and deal with a bunch of people who have been driven insane for some reason. So during the course of this, you're trying to just avoid all sorts of different cultists who believe that killing you in the most destructive way possible are probably going to get their way to heaven. They want to tear you apart in the most gruesome way possible, and the only way to keep breathing is to stay out of sight and out of mind. But as much as this is just a deadly game of keep away, in a lot of ways this feels like a very, very great environmental scare piece. Because you are stuck crouching in cabinets or sometimes just creeping through gigantic cornfields and stuff, you really begin to appreciate the brilliant sound design. Having these whispers of people in the darkness as they try and search you, just reading messed up Bible verses that probably don't exist, and times where you have to run even though you hear everybody with clattering lanterns right behind you. Outlast 2 is one of those games that gives you nightmares, and that is the best reward from it. Number 4. Metro Exodus. Okay, this game truly stands alone when it comes to the survival of survival horror. Now, this game is a bit outside the typical scope, mostly because this has a lot of different mechanics in it. Having oxygen levels, dealing with radiation, or sometimes just having very weird monsters that kind of defy the explanation of what could actually exist. Metro Exodus takes place in a near future, but in a timeline where a bunch of nuclear bombs have gone off. Now, you're somebody that was lucky enough to grow up underground, so you don't have any crazy mutations or eyeballs falling out of your head, but you do have to deal with stuff whenever you visit the surface to try and scrounge new supplies. This means you're going to be dealing with all sorts of very deadly creatures that don't make sense and definitely want to eat you, because if you die, they survive. There is a desperation in this game that is fantastic. Now, on the surface, it is just a first-person shooter, but I've always thought that it walks this very careful line of making it so you're panicked, but also there's almost this very demented serenity to the desperation. I love Metro Exodus, but more than that, I really appreciate what they managed to do with so little and yet with so much just context. Number 3. Little Nightmares 2. When I was growing up, my very favorite movies were by Tim Burton. I always enjoyed his very dark sense of fairy tale storytelling, like the fact that he could do something so messed up like A Nightmare Before Christmas, or his particular take on Batman. I always really deeply appreciated the fact that there's this whimsical freaking darkness that made this just feel like almost a magical time. And Little Nightmares 2, it really manages to evoke that same sort of vibe. We're playing as these little kids that have essentially no ability to speak, no ability to scream, no ability to express just how terrifying the situation that they're completely stuck in is. But still, they're trying to escape. Now, when I use the word little, I mean that very literally. These guys are like 2 feet tall, or at least they seem that way, and they're in a world of 10-foot tall murderous giants. Now, what I like about this game is that it's broken down into these different zones. So you deal with like a guy hunting you with a shotgun at one point. There's a time where you're going against this lady who can stretch herself out. Now each of these different creatures you run into actually eat human flesh. They want to make you into their very tiny freaking kid taquito. And that to me is such a freaking messed up fact. I like that whenever you get captured in this game, the screen just very ominously fades to black and puts you back to the last checkpoint. This is one of those rare experiences that manages to make it where your imagination is almost scarier than the game itself. It gives you the tools to freak yourself out, and Little Nightmares 2 is definitely one of those games that pulls off you being freaked out on your own. Number 2. Evil Within 2. This game just rocks, and I feel like it's one of those experiences that is definitely just never given enough credit for how much of a freaking masterpiece it actually is. But let me talk about the thing about this that I feel like makes it work the most, which is the setting of it. Evil Within 2 is stuck basically inside a haunted version of VR. There is the city that exists in a gigantic program. Everybody in this is a real human whose brain is hooked up to this gigantic supercomputer. And in this game, we take the role of Sebastian, a detective who's been basically hired to go into the simulation and try and figure out what's gone wrong. But once he gets inside, it turns out that the computer has gone incredibly dark and it's gotten incredibly twisted. People who are wandering around have now been turned into basically weird, melty zombies. A lot of these monsters and stuff are people's own dark desires, and there is a serial killer who somehow managed to slip into the machine. So you have somebody that's basically gotten godlike powers inside their own personal dimension, and you, as a random normal dude with a pistol in his pocket and a knife on his freaking belt, has to find a way to not only defeat him, but also get out. I love every single second of this, from the stealth combat to the side quests. This is a game that manages to just do every single part of it completely right. And what's always made it a bit crazier is the fact that this game just constantly goes on sale. Like, this is one of the cheapest and greatest freaking games I've ever played in my life. Do it. Do yourself a favor. Pick up Evil Within 2 and play it, if nothing else. The only game in the freaking console that's even better than this is the one we gotta talk about now. Number 1. Resident Evil Village. This was such a difficult choice for me because there is such a wide range of different styles of horror across the PS4 and the PS5, but I had to pick a Resident Evil game as the very top of this list because the Resident Evil games are seriously the best of the best. But more than that, it came down to selecting which Resident Evil game deserves this top spot. While it is true that perhaps the Resident Evil 2 remake is better for newcomers, or the classic RE1 remake or Resident Evil 0 is more unique, I feel like Resident Evil Village is such a great sense of payoff. This is the beginning of a new storyline. We started with a new character named Ethan Winters in Resident Evil 7, and it just comes together even better in Resident Evil 8. You're playing as just a random dude who's trying to live through the worst night ever. He's basically living in a foreign country, and suddenly his baby gets kidnapped. A team of people come and take his child off into the darkness, and now, in an act of pure freaking thrills, you have to try and hunt them down. Except, oopsie, there's werewolves all over the place, and also a bunch of vampires. So now, you're gonna have to find a way to actually defeat all these supernatural monsters, and sometimes people with like psychic abilities and stuff, and also find your baby before everything gets even worse. I love this game. I seriously cannot stop playing it. I've literally played through this game 12 different times now. I've done the Mercenaries mode. I think that Resident Evil Village is one of the best Resident Evils that's ever been made, which is such a high freaking bar of praise because this is my favorite freaking game series of all time. I cannot stop saying that this game is absolutely worth every single second spent inside this gory, glorious universe. And for that reason, I'm giving it my pick as the very best PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 5 game. Did your favorite game not make the list? Got an idea for a future top 10? Well, please leave it in the comments down below. I promise I'll happen to see it, especially if it's a cool hidden gem I haven't played yet. So, do me the biggest favor of all. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and please keep dreaming. I love your studio.
Keep dreaming.
Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.